title today: The First Preaching of Paul After His Encounter with Yeshua on Damascus Road. I don't know about you all, but I haven't heard much of this over the years in the churches. It's in the Bible. It's there freely, but somehow, in all the years I've been here, I've never heard this preached intact. Peace here and the peace there, but never intact for some reason. If in going along, we will somehow or another find out why this wasn't preached. Well, let's get into it. If you get into it, the difficulties become clear. No one wants to upset the status quo of modern Christianity. Any read of these events makes it crystal clear that the assemblies in Jerusalem were all Sabbath-keeping assemblies. Not so much of one accord, the way they were supposed to be, but this was because of the jealousy of the Judaic leadership at the time. And a lot of the things that were attached to the risen Yeshua, Messiah, they didn't want these things known. But Elohim did. And thus, they're in the Bible. Starting at Acts, the 14th chapter, the first verse. And read along, because this stuff you haven't heard. Well, you might have. I didn't hear it much. Acts, the 14th chapter, the first verse. Now it happened that in Iconium they entered together into the synagogue of the Jews and spoke in such a way that a large number of both Jews and Greeks believed. But the Jews who were disobedient stirred up and poisoned the minds of the Gentiles against the brothers. And they stayed there for a considerable time, speaking boldly for Yeshua, the Messiah, who testified to the message of his grace, granting signs and wonders to be performed through their hands. But the population of the city was divided. And some were with the Jews, and some with the apostles. So, when an inclination took place on the part of both the Gentiles and the Jews together, with their rulers, to mistreat them and to stone them, they became aware of it and fled to the Lycaonian cities, Lystra and Derbe, and the surrounding region. And there they were continuing to proclaim the good news. And in Lystra, a certain man was sitting powerless in his feet. Lame, in other words, lame from birth, who had never walked. This man listened while Paul was speaking. Paul looked intently at him, seeing that he had faith to be healed, and said with a loud voice, "Stand up on your feet." And he leaped up and began walking. This man had weeks before met with Yeshua. Weeks before that, he had killed Stephen. And then this. Acts, the 14th chapter, the 11th verse. And when the crowds saw that Paul had done this, they raised their voices in the Lycaonian language, saying, "The gods have become like men and have become down to us." And then they began calling Barnabas Zeus and Paul Hermes, because he was the principal speaker. This is another complication in this area of Derbe and Lystra. The new converts had deep roots in paganism. That roots surrounded them. The pagans had their own temples also. Continuing in 13th verse. And the priest of the temple of Zeus was just outside the city. He brought bulls and garlands to the gates and was wanting to offer sacrifice along with the crowds. But when the apostles, Barnabas and Paul, heard about it, they tore their clothing and rushed out into the crowd, shouting and saying, "Men, why are you doing these things? We also are men with the same nature as you, proclaiming the good news that you should turn from these worthless things to the living Elohim, who made the heavens and the earth and the sea and all the things that are in them, who in generations past all these past permitted all the nations to go their own ways. And yet he did not leave himself without witness by doing good, giving you rain from heaven and fruitful seasons, satisfying you with food and your hearts with gladness. And although they said these things only with difficulty, did they dissuade the crowds from offering sacrifice to them. But Jews arrived from Antioch and Iconium And when they had won over the crowds and stoned Paul, they dragged him outside the city, thinking he was dead. And after the disciples surrounded him, he got up and went out into the city. And on the next day, he departed with Barnabas for Derbe. And after they had proclaimed the good news in that city and made many disciples, they returned to Lystra and to Iconium and to Antioch, strengthening the souls of the disciples, encouraging them to continue in the faith, and saying, through many persecutions, it is necessary for us to enter into the kingdom of Elohim. Setting us up for the future in this country, in this world as a whole. And many believed, and this is part of that belief system of this place of safety. The place of safety is this Bible itself in its words. You hang on to these words, you will be safe. Even if your body temporarily dies. A lot of people don't want to hear that. 23. And when they had appointed elders for them in every church, after praying with fasting, they entrusted them to Yeshua, in whom they had believed. And they passed through Pisidia and came to Pamphylia. And after they proclaimed the message in Persia, they went down to Italia. And from there, they sailed away to Antioch, where they had been commended to the grace of Yahweh for the work they had completed there. And when they arrived and called the church together, they reported all that Yeshua had done with them, and that he had opened the door of faith for the Gentiles. And they stayed no little time with the disciples. And at this time, they had an unction to go again to the Judeans and call them out on their insistence on circumcising their new converts, which the word of Yahweh did not say anything about any continuation of circumcision in the Melchizedek priesthood. Continuing in Acts, the 15th chapter, the first verse. Now, some men coming down from Judea were teaching the brothers, unless you are circumcised according to the custom of Moses, you cannot be saved. When Paul and Barnabas had an argument, big argument and debate with them, the brothers appointed Paul and Barnabas with some others from among them to go up to Jerusalem to the emissaries and elders about this issue. So they were sent on their way by the Antioch community. They were passing through both Phoenicia and Samaria, describing in detail the conversion of the Gentiles, and they were bringing great joy to all the brothers and sisters when they arrived in Jerusalem. They were welcomed by the community and the emissaries. And the elders. They reported all that Elohim had done in helping them. But some belonging to the party of the Pharisees who had believed stood up saying, "Again, it is necessary to circumcise them and to command them to keep the Torah of Moses." The Torah of who? So many now believe the Torah came from Moses. But what does the Bible say? Turn your books to Deuteronomy, the 28th chapter, the 58th verse. This is where it's difficult. Even the book itself is difficult if you don't read it. Deuteronomy, the 28th chapter, the 58th verse. If you do not diligently observe all the words of this law written in this scroll, by revering this glorious and awesome name, Yahweh your Elohim. Not exactly Moses, is it? It isn't exactly Moses there, is it? Exodus, the 34th chapter, the 27th verse. And Yahweh said to Moses, "Write for yourself these words, because according to these words, I have made a covenant with you and with Israel." And he was there with Yahweh 40 days and 40 nights. He ate no food and drank no water. And he wrote on the tablets the words of the covenant, the 10 words or the 10 commandments. And when Moses came down from Mount Sinai, the 2 tablets of the testimony were in the hand of Moses. At his coming down from the mountain, and Moses did not know that the skin of his face shined because of his speaking with him, Yahweh Elohim. The whole of the law was written before the world was made. But for our purposes, this plainly says Yahweh, not Moses, wrote the law. The ceremonial law and the 10 commandments. Both were dictated to Moses on Mount Sinai. Yahweh wrote both. And generally, when he spoke of the law, he and Yeshua Messiah were speaking of the 10 commandments, not the royal law. Many confuse these to this day and confuse these beneath them to this day on these points. And that's one of the reasons that you haven't been preached this very much, because it clears up a lot of things that they dangled in front of us for years, but that was a past time. Those days are over. Acts, the 15th chapter, the 6th verse. Acts, the 15th chapter, the 6th verse. The emissaries and elders were gathered together to examine this issue. After much debate, Peter stood up and said to them, "Brothers, you know that in the early days Elohim chose from among you, that by my mouth the Gentiles should hear the message of the good news and believe. And Elohim, who knows the heart, testified to them by giving them the Ruach HaKodesh, or the Holy Spirit, just as he also did for us." Silence is golden. For he made no distinction between us and them, purifying their hearts through faith. Why then do you put Elohim to the test by putting a yoke on the neck of the disciples, which neither our fathers nor we have been able to bear? But instead, we believe that we are saved through this grace of the Master Yeshua in the same way as they are. Then the whole group became silent and were listening to Barnabas and Paul as they were describing in detail all the signs and wonders Elohim had done through them among the Gentiles. After they finished speaking, Jacob answered, or you have James there, probably. "Brothers, listen to me. Simon has described how Elohim first showed his concern by taking from the Gentiles a people for his name. The words of the prophets agree, as it is written, 'After this, I will return and rebuild the fallen tabernacle of David. I will rebuild it, its ruins, and I will restore it, so that the rest of humanity may seek Yahweh.' Namely, all the Gentiles who are called by my name, says Elohim, who make these things known from of old. Therefore I judge not to trouble those from among the Gentiles who are turning to Elohim. But to write to them to abstain from the contamination of idols, from sexual immorality, and from what is strangled, and from blood. For Moses from ancient generations has had in every city those who proclaim him, since he is read in all the synagogues every Shabbat. This is what most people misunderstand about these verses. They were pointing to Moses because their teachings are taught in most synagogues and messianic assemblies every Shabbat or Sabbath. Over time, the new converts would sort out for themselves what was to be done and what was truly done away. in the Melchizedek priesthood. Verse 22. Then it seemed good to the emissaries and elders with the whole community to choose men from among themselves to send to Antioch with Paul and Barnabas. They sent Judah, also called Barsabbas, and Silas, leading men among the brethren, and this letter along with them. The emissaries and the elders, your brothers, to the Gentiles, brothers of Antioch, Syria, and Cilicia. Greetings, since we have heard that some from among us, have troubled you with words disturbing to your souls, although we gave them no such authorization. Talking about the Pharisees. They had no such authorization. 25. It seems good to us, having come to one accord, to select men to send you with our beloved Barnabas and Paul, men who have risked their lives for the name of our Master, Yeshua the Messiah. We therefore have sent to you Judah and Silas, who themselves will report to you the same things by word of mouth. It seemed good to the Ruach HaKodesh, the Holy Spirit, in other words, and to us, not to place on you any greater burden than these essentials. That you abstain from things offered to idols, from blood, from things strangled, and from sexual immorality. By keeping away from these things, you will do well. Shalom. So when they were sent off, they went down to Antioch. And when they had gathered the people, the group together, they delivered the letter. The people read it and rejoiced over its encouragement. Judah and Silas, prophets themselves, encouraged the brothers and sisters with a long message and strengthened them. In spending some time there, they were sent off with shalom by the brothers and sisters to those who had sent them. But Paul and Barnabas remained in Antioch, teaching and proclaiming the word of Elohim with many others. After some days, Paul said to Barnabas, "Let's return and visit the brothers and sisters in every city where we have proclaimed the word of Elohim, to see how they are." Barnabas was planning to take along John, called Mark, but Paul was insisting that they shouldn't take him along, the one who had deserted them in Pamphylia, not accompanying them in the work. A sharp disagreement took place so that they split off from one another. Barnabas took Mark with him and sailed away to Cyprus. But Paul selected Silas and went out, being entrusted by the brothers and sisters to the gracious care of Yahweh. He went through Syria and Cilicia, strengthening the communities. Some from Judea taught the Gentile converts in Antioch that they could not be saved unless they observed the whole ceremonial law as given by Moses. And they sought to destroy Christian liberty. There is a strange proneness in us to think that all do wrong who do not do just as they do. Their doctrine was very discouraging. Wise and good men desire to avoid contests and disputes as far as they can. Yet, when false teachers oppose the main truths of the gospel or bring in hurtful doctrines, we must not decline to oppose them. But as here, through the unified doctrines of the Bible, not through our own thoughts. But the logic of these facts does not convince obstinate theorists. And so the Judaizing party persisted in their "it is needful to circumcise them." None are so blind as those to whom religion is mainly a matter of a ritual. You may display the fairest graces of Christian character before them, and you get no answer but the reiteration of, "it is needful to circumcise you." But on their own ground in Jerusalem, the spokesman of that party enlarged their demands. In Antioch, they had insisted on circumcision. In Jerusalem, they added the demand for the entire conformity to the Mosaic law, 614 or so commandments and all of that. They went amok, in other words. They were quite logical in their approach. Their principal demand, that extension of the requirement, and was therefore condemned as utterly unworkable. Now that the whole battery was unmasked, the issue here was clear. Is Christianity to be a Jewish sect or the universal religion of the universe? Clear as it was, few in the assembly saw it that way at the time. But the parting of the ways had been reached. The same way that they let Barabbas live and Yeshua die, digging in their heels and spitting until they got their way. This will not work for anyone in the time of Jacob's trouble. Don't try it then. That's the worst time to try it. Try this. Any questions? Anyone?
Okay, so you're saying it's like null and void to be trying to keep the ceremonial law in the tribulation and time of trouble, right? In Jacob's trouble.
Yes.
Okay.
The only thing that really will get you in is the basics. The 10 Commandments. The
Got a question. What is the main focal point of circumcision?
There is none anymore. That was the Levitical priesthood. We are now under the Melchizedek priesthood. And it says in several places in the book that even Yeshua no longer requires circumcision. Develop.
The 600 and whatever number that is, Lord. Is someone doing those now?
They're trying to. Some of them are only for women.
The six,
But they're not required. The only thing that Yeshua requires at this point is the 10 Commandments, the holy days. Anywhere that it says Sabbaths is plural, that's the holy days as well.
are the holy days in there?
Mm-hmm.
600. Well, why they just, I don't.
Many now are not keeping the holy days because they didn't say it there, but it is there, plainly. Everything that Yeshua did, we were to do continually until he comes back. And he kept all the holy days.
But now they said they did away with them. That's why they don't keep them anymore.
Well, everybody says something different. Everybody says something different.
That nothing's changed. So
Well, we
disregard it.
we have to change. That's what we do. That's why we give up this flesh before we get into the kingdom.
I mean, if he said keep these holy days,
Mm-hmm.
then why would people say we don't have to do that anymore?
Well, he said also the seventh day. Most people do go on the first day of the week.
Yeah.
As I said at the beginning of the sermon, most people do their own thing anyway.
That's true.
And they don't much like this book anymore. Everybody's got their own.
That's true.
Their own stuff, special stuff that they don't like in there. They pulled it out. The NIV was first and many others. Orly.
Well, in the book of Revelations, it says that the only ones that go into the book of them are those who have the faith in Yeshua and keep the commandments. And in the book of John, he says that we love him and keep the commandments.
Mm-hmm. It says it in several other places also. And marks down on it. Thurman.
I just want to bring up Galatians chapter 5, verse 2 and 3. And it says, indeed, I, Paul, say to you that if you become circumcised, Messiah will profit you nothing. And I testify again to every man who becomes circumcised that he is a debtor to keep the whole law.
Mm-hmm. And that's essentially why the whole nation of Israel is going to be coming back in flesh instead of spirit. They said they were going to do it and didn't do it. he's going to have to prove that they can do it because they never did it before they will be let into the kingdom of God.
The scripture that Thurman just read, is that for men or is that for children? You know, babies, you know, when you circumcise babies, does that apply to them or no?
It applies to no one at that point. No one. It does away with the whole process. This is a new covenant we're under. This is the Melchizedek priesthood. Levitical priesthood is done away completely. No one is to do that anymore. Child or man or anyone else.
So those who have done it, like myself, are we subjecting our children to the death of the whole law?
If you didn't do it in some ritual of this, no. If you didn't, I didn't say, I wasn't there. It isn't a demand anymore.
You have a comment upstairs.
Yes. That's not my place to determine why.
I was kind of piggybacking on the Sarah thing. And not to settle for religious reasons, but it's another way of doing things.
Yeah, that doesn't change my answer any. And more importantly, it doesn't change his answer one whit.
Anybody else have a question?
Yeah.
Go ahead, Sister Orton.
No, she is.
I'm sorry.
Pastor Curtis, I wanted to read something where it says in Jeremiah 4:4, it says, circumcise yourselves to Yahweh and take away the foreskins of your heart. Ye men of Judea, inhabitants of Jerusalem, lest my fury come forth like fire and burn that none can quench it because the evil of your doings. I just wanted to comment what you were speaking on, the circumcision. It's of the heart, and not of the foreskin of the man. It's your heart.
The heart.
It is the heart. Okay, then, that's all I wanted to say. We didn't have a mic on here. I'm sorry I had to nod.
It's okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Thurman.
You made a comment that, speaking of the place of safety, that it is the scriptures itself, the word itself for us. And in these times, these last times. Okay, so what does that have to say, that we should be living, fully obeying the Father's word, or?
Yes.
Okay.
He will save you wherever you are. You can be in the midst of a fire like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They were in a roaring fire. Didn't even smell smoke on them when they came out. And that whole thing of a plan of safety, a place of safety, was a way to get people in the door anyway. And there is no place of safety. But wherever God places you in His arms, that's safe. Don't look for a place of safety. He is the place of safety. Any other questions? Love you all. Title today: The First Preaching of Paul After His Encounter with Yeshua on Damascus Road. I don't know about you all, but I haven't heard much of this over the